Welcome back to Sleepy History, where we wander slowly through time, past dusty shelves and forgotten pillows, looking for the quiet stories no one ever rushed to tell. Tonight we're heading deep into the world of silk secrets, and the kinds of books that definitely weren't meant for the dinner table. You find yourself walking slowly across cool marble tiles, surrounded by faint floral perfume and the hush of distant laughter. It's night in medieval Persia, somewhere around the 13th century, and tucked behind heavy carved doors, beneath domed ceilings and flickering oil lamps, a scribe is preparing to write. Not a war chronicle or a religious treatise, but something much more delicate, a book about pleasure. You glance around the courtyard. Jasmine vines creep up the walls. The cushions are velvet and impossibly soft, like someone shaved a cloud. A young calligrapher nearby dips his reed pen into black ink and begins composing lines in elegant, nostalgic script, his brow furrowed not in embarrassment, but in concentration. Because in this time and place, writing about sex isn't obscene. It's an art, a science, a moral guidebook, and sometimes a poem. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lower yourself onto a low bench beside the scribe, your robes, or let's be honest, your pajamas brushing the polished stone beneath you. Somewhere nearby, a nightingale begins to sing. It sounds suspiciously like it's rehearsing a love song from memory. The scribe's tools are laid out neatly before him. Paper smooth and handmade sits stacked in a tight pile, heavy with potential. His reed pen has been trimmed to a perfect point. The ink, ground from soot and gum arabic, glistens with promise. You watch as he opens a worn leather book beside him, one filled with notes, half verses, fragments of older treatises. Some of these texts, you realize, have been copied and recopied for centuries, parts of them from India, others echoing ancient Greek medical theories, and still others full of phrases that seem too poetic to be science, but too specific to be just poetry. He begins. His hand moves slowly across the page. The first lines set the tone. Respectful, serene, a little philosophical. The pleasures of union, it says, are among the gifts given to mankind by the Creator. They must be neither abused nor ignored, but studied with care and approached with reverence. You tilt your head. Not exactly Tinder. You glance again at the title. Something like The Book of Comfort and the Garden of Delights. Not that different from modern clickbait, if you think about it. And yet, what follows isn't a manual filled with diagrams or numbered steps. It's gentle, fragrant, lush with metaphor. You quickly realize that everything must be described indirectly. Euphemism is essential. A kiss becomes a gathering of roses. A woman's body is a valley of sweet almonds. Genitals? Often disguised as gardens, stars, jewels, or, in one particularly creative case, a pigeon. A pigeon. The scribe pauses to warm his hands by a small charcoal brazier. You hear the faint crackle of burning sandalwood. A servant passes with a tray of honeyed dates and sweet water. You accept a date, chewing slowly as the story continues. These manuals weren't just medical texts, although they borrowed heavily from Greek humoral theory and Indian Ayurvedic tradition. They weren't just literature, although they were filled with poetry and ornate language. They were something in between, a little bit doctor, a little bit Uncle Dash who dash one, single quotes T dash, make dash, I dash contact, a little bit therapist, and honestly a little bit fan fiction. Historians still argue whether these manuals were truly used by physicians in courts or were quietly read by women in harems and scholars in private. Some believe they were tools for education, others that they were guides to emotional balance. Either way, they've survived the centuries, sometimes hidden in footnotes, sometimes tucked into larger medical works, and sometimes just waiting for a very sleepy person like you to rediscover them. You brush a fleck of ash from your sleeve and glance up at the night sky above. A few stars blink back at you, cool, distant, silent. The same stars that would have watched over the scribes as they wrote these lines nearly 800 years ago. Stars that heard secrets and bore witness to giggles muffled behind embroidered curtains. Back at the scribe's desk, the pen is moving again. He writes about approach, how one must take time, offer words, observe breath and mood. There's a recommended pace, and surprisingly, an emphasis on conversation. Consent of a sort is baked into the etiquette. The idea is to cultivate harmony, not dominance. He scratches his nose thoughtfully and mutters something about the order of actions before union. You pretend not to notice. He writes slowly, balancing clinical description with poetic restraint. The paragraph ends with an image of moonlight filtering through rose-colored silk. Honestly, you'd read that. In the margin, he doodles a small decorative vine-pure habit. But maybe it's a little flirtation with the reader. These texts weren't anonymous. They were personal. Writers sometimes inserted little jokes or compliments for their patrons, or even subtle shade at rival scholars. You imagine one writer whispering to another, "You still use almond oil? How provincial." A breeze moves through the garden. Bells jingle from a nearby courtyard. The smell of baked quince lingers faintly in the air. The scribe puts down his pen and stretches, satisfied for no. You've barely scratched the surface, and already the air feels heavier with mystery. There are so many layers here: culture, medicine, emotion, politics, all swirling around this soft, persistent idea that pleasure, in its quietest and most respectful form, was worth studying. And as you settle deeper into your seat, date in hand, belly warm, and mind gently floating, you realize this isn't really about sex. Not just. It's about being human and curious, and a little bit awkward across every age. The scribe leans over and whispers, "Do you think this metaphor works?" He points to a sentence that reads, "The approach should be as slow as the melting of winter snow on the highest peak." You nod. "Perfect," you whisper. Absolutely no one will know what that means. He beams with pride. You both sit in companionable silence, ink drying on the page between you, pigeons still suspiciously metaphorical, and history whispering from the shadows. The laughter drifts from deeper within the palace, curling through latticework and soft drapes. You follow it instinctively, rising from the calligrapher's side and slipping through a narrow passage lined with delicate floral tiles. The air shifts, warmer now, perfumed with rosewater and oud. Silk slippers shuffle faintly on the floors ahead, and a pair of attendants pass you by with trays of folded linen, whispering in a dialect you barely recognize. The harem is not what you expect. It's not one vast room, but a series of spaces, a quiet empire of inner courtyards. Libraries, washrooms, and bedrooms connected by gently turning corridors. And it's not filled with idle women either. Here, they are studying, sewing, reading, laughing, teaching children. A world unto itself, walled off from the outer court, not just by architecture, but by purpose. A private realm, female-governed, structured by age, birth, influence, and an unspoken hierarchy of wisdom. You're led to a small room where older women sit on cushions, their heads bent in conversation. One of them, her hair wrapped in a violet scarf that signals rank, holds a folded manuscript in her lap. Not a Quranic verse, but something else. She fans the pages open and begins reading aloud in a low, steady voice, while the younger women gather, heads tilted, some already stifling smiles. It's not bawdy, not at all. The words are careful, rich with metaphor, occasionally drifting into advice and back again into poetry. She's reading from a sensual manual, but one tailored for a female audience. The tone is subtle, conspiratorial. and laced with a kind of elegant amusement that only comes from experience. It's not just about what to do, but how to feel about it, how to enter intimacy with softness, caution, and intention. You sit at the edge, listening. There's mention of preparation ritual bathing, scenting the body with specific oils, brushing the hair until it shines, choosing robes in cooling shades of green or blue. The idea isn't seduction so much as readiness, to arrive calm, dignified, emotionally open. One passage even suggests that one should enter the chamber as if entering a garden, without rushing and without shoes. You're handed a ceramic bowl of milk infused with cardamom and cinnamon. It's warm and earthy, comforting, just like the voice of the older woman as she continues. There's a kind of rhythm to these teachings, a balance between the physical and the emotional, between bodily pleasure and spiritual grace. It's believed that intimacy done well nourishes the soul, that harmony between partners is a kind of divine alignment, and that discord in the bedroom can ripple outward, disturbing health, mood, even fate. Some passages become more precise. A small debate breaks out over whether frankincense or camphor is the better pre-bed scent, and whether applying perfume behind the knees is truly necessary. One young woman insists it is. Another swears by the scent of clove tucked inside linen sleeves. And all the while, the older woman reads on. She speaks of communication, of reading expressions and gestures, of laughter as foreplay, of gentleness as strength. One line strikes you: the lover who listens is the one remembered. Historians still argue whether these women actually had access to the same texts circulated among men, or if theirs were oral traditions passed quietly through generations. Some scholars believe female-centered versions were edited down and stripped of technical detail. Others suggest that the real knowledge was never written. It lived in gatherings like this, in rooms like these, told with glances, gesture, and shared silences between aunts, mothers, and friends. A girl no older than 16 raises her hand. She asks what happens if you feel nothing, if the moment is cold, or worse, uncomfortable. The room goes still. The elder nods solemnly and flips a few pages back. She reads a parable about a young bride and a night filled with silence. Not pain, not drama, just blankness. The lesson isn't to force a feeling, but to wait. To prepare better next time, to speak, to rest. Even desire, the text insists, needs nourishment. There's something quietly radical about this. A recognition of women's agency, not thunderously declared, but calmly assumed. Desire isn't seen as sinful, but natural, and its absence, not a failure, but a message. Outside the room, you hear a lute being tuned. Someone is humming under their breath. A tray clinks gently as tea is poured. In this world, time seems to move at half speed, and the advice is embroidered into the very texture of life. Not a list of instructions, but a pattern, like a tapestry. Each thread adding softness and structure to the next. Your eyes drift to the side, where a wall is hung with delicate embroidery flowers, birds, vines, and something else. A shape you've seen before, the pigeon. You blink. Maybe not a pigeon. There's laughter again. You lean back, sipping the last of your warm milk, the flavor still lingering on your tongue. The elder finishes her reading, folds the pages neatly, and places them beside her with the care of someone preserving both a story and a responsibility. As the younger women begin to disperse, they stop to thank her, not with curtsies or bows, but by pressing their hands briefly over their hearts. She nods to each one, her expression gentle but firm, like a librarian who knows which books can't leave the room. You rise slowly, stepping back into the hall. The scents follow you: clove, rose, old paper, warm milk, candle wax. A library of aromas, a memory carved into the air. And just as you reach the threshold, the elder calls out, almost as an afterthought, "Tell the scribe next door to stop drying pigeons." Everyone knows. You laugh quietly and promise you will. The scribe is still where you left him, hunched slightly over the parchment, though now a different scroll lies unfurled before him. He glances up as you return, smiling as though you've just gone for a short walk, rather than a philosophical stroll through the most private chambers of the royal court. I've switched to a new passage, he says, one of my favorites. The art of suggestion. He taps his reed pen gently against the rim of the inkwell. You settle back onto your cushion beside him, this time more aware of the subtle music of his script, the delicate scratch of pen on paper, the tiny sighs he makes when lines fall perfectly into place. You're watching the act of writing as performance. He's not just transcribing knowledge, he's curating it, shaping each phrase with intention, making sure it strikes the perfect balance between medical precision and social grace. In this next section, the focus is on how to talk about intimacy without saying anything directly. You peek at the lines he's writing. Euphemism, again, is the key, but this time it's elevated to an art form, where the Greeks might have spoken of warm humors and the Indians of sacred energy flows. Persian manuals disguise anatomy and metaphors drawn from gardens, astronomy, and food. A woman's body becomes a poetic terrain. Lips are cherries or ruby gates, thighs are silk roads, and certain other parts, well, let's just say the almond at the center of the rose has a longer literary career than you'd expect. The scribe chuckles softly at a particularly winding sentence. Too many similes, he mutters, scratching one out and replacing it with something involving a night-blooming flower. You don't ask which one. What strikes you most, though, is not the subject itself, but the care with which it's handled. There's no vulgarity here, no clinical coldness either. The author, whoever he was, seems genuinely invested in making the reader feel the information rather than just absorb it. One paragraph reads like a description of a constellation. When the hour is right and the air still, let the lovers meet like the moon and the lake, touching without disturbing, reflecting without drowning. Another sounds almost like a cooking recipe, which, given the sensory detail, isn't entirely surprising. Begin with words sweeter than syrup. Add glances, slowly and without haste. Stir the silence until warm. You can't help but smile. It's less Kama Sutra, more Persian bake-off. But there's elegance to it, rhythm, a lulling cadence that makes you forget you're even learning anything at all. Of course, this didn't happen in a vacuum. Historians still debate how much of this poetic restraint was shaped by Persian literary tradition versus religious modesty. Some scholars argue that the metaphor-heavy style was a clever way to slip these texts past censors or clerics, especially as certain dynasties became more conservative. Others believe it was simply a reflection of Persian aesthetics, where even wine was rarely called wine, and lovers never addressed each other by name. There are manuscripts in which two entire lovers' conversations happen without a single direct reference to their bodies. They speak in riddles, offer fruits to each other, mention birds, moons, rivers, and the color of their dreams. You imagine the scholars copying these lines centuries later, muttering, "Wait, is this about sex or landscaping?" Some of it veers into delightful absurdity. One older manuscript, faded but still legible, describes the ideal bedroom as one in which the air is scented with saffron, the sheets the color of ripe melons, and the mattress as soft as a merchant's conscience. That last part gives you pause. Apparently, medieval Persian mattress makers had strong opinions, but the euphemisms weren't just for beauty. They served another function too, comfort. By wrapping explicit topics in metaphor, the text created emotional distance, making it easier for readers to absorb difficult or taboo ideas. Like a spoonful of sugar with every awkward lesson, you lean forward and trace one elegant line with your finger. The ink is still damp. The beloved should be greeted not as a vessel, but as a verse. A little dramatic, maybe, but also kind of perfect. The scribe notices your interest and shares a story, whether it's true or apocryphal, who knows. Apparently, there was once a young court physician who wrote his own manual and gave it to his new wife as a wedding gift. She, unimpressed, rewrote the entire second half and sent it back with margin notes. Somewhere between flirting and peer review. Not all euphemisms were delicate, however. Some were surprisingly cheeky. One line advises that a lover's body be explored, like a well-irrigated orchard after a summer rain. Another warns against rushing the harvest, especially when the soil has not yet warmed. You stop reading that one halfway through. What's fascinating is how consistently the authors return to emotional cues. They write as though intimacy is not a fixed formula, but a process of mutual translation, learning your partner's unspoken language. Metaphor by metaphor. One of the most copied lines in several manuscripts reads, "No gesture is gentle unless it is answered." You let that one settle in. It's hard to tell whether the scribe is translating from memory or improvising as he writes, but his pacing is unhurried, almost meditative. He refills his ink, adds a flourish to the margin, then stretches his fingers. You offer him one of the leftover dates from the harem. He takes it with a nod, chews slowly, then points to a sentence with a smirk. Some lovers, like certain fruits, ripen only when ignored. You both try not to laugh. You fail. By now, the moon has climbed higher, casting a soft light across the courtyard tiles. A breeze rustles through the vines, carrying with it the faint scent of roasted almonds and citrus blossoms. You lean back against the cushion, eyes heavy, lulled not just by the silence, but by the softness of everything around you, the ink, the language, even the awkward metaphors. It's all wrapped in something deeply human, a quiet need to make the private both teachable and tender. You glance at the pile of parchment still untouched and wonder what the next passage will hold. You don't ask, though. You'll find out soon enough. For now, you sit beside the scribe, barely blinking as he finishes the last line of the page. Approach as you would a secret, gently and only once invited. The night stretches on, and your limbs are beginning to loosen into the cushions. Time has slowed to a thick, honeyed crawl. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the quiet clink of silver dishes being gathered, evidence of a feast long finished. You hadn't even noticed, but your nose, ever helpful, now catches a new fragrance drifting on the breeze. Cardamom, roasted meat, a hint of mint, and wait, is that saffron? Apparently, the scribe has also decided that writing about intimacy is best done on a full stomach. He leans back with a satisfied sigh and reaches for a nearby plate piled high with spiced lentils and sticky rice. You glance at your own belly and realize, now that you're thinking about it, it has been a while since your last imaginary meal. Before we continue, the scribe murmurs, chewing slowly, "You must understand. The body cannot enjoy what the belly resents." You blink. He chuckles. You can't love well if you've eaten badly. And just like that, you're plunged into a new section of the manual, a sensual guide not of motion or metaphor, but of meals. Specifically, what one ought to eat or avoid before engaging in any romantic activity. Apparently, Persian scholars of the 13th century had many thoughts on the matter. Some reasonable, some aggressively cabbage forward. You follow the scribe as he moves toward a low shelf near the corner of the room. There, tucked between medical texts and loose scrolls on dream interpretation, he pulls out a slim volume bound in polished walnut boards. The title is simple, A Mirror for the Banquet of Lovers. Inside, pages of culinary dos and don'ts that blur the line between nutritional science and astrological superstition. He flips to a section marked by a faded red thread and reads aloud, "If the heart is to be set aflame, let not the stomach be cooled by cucumbers." Cucumbers. Public enemy number one. Historians still argue whether these warnings were based on actual observations or simply extrapolated from Greek humoral theory. The idea that the body contained four humors, and that one's physical state was a delicate, gurgling balance of hot, cold, wet, and dry. In that framework, sexual passion was considered a hot and moist phenomenon. So foods that were cold or drying were said to stifle desire. Hence, beware the cucumber. The scribe rattles off a list from memory. Avoid lentils, cabbage, vinegar, and anything described as dampening to the spirits. Instead, favor roasted chickpeas, lightly spiced lamb, figs, and a thick syrup made of dates and black pepper. Eggs were said to awaken the lower winds. Walnuts were encouraged, unless eaten with onions, which might cause dreaming or sneezing, or possibly both. In the margins of one recipe for roasted quail, someone has scribbled a note: avoid with melon unless married 6 years. No explanation offered. None needed, apparently. You peek further into the book and find that entire feasts were suggested based on time of year, phase of the moon, and of course social status. A wealthy lover might be advised to indulge in honey-roasted almonds and saffron rice served on a silver tray, while a student with fewer coins might be told to boil lentils with mint and hope for the best. There's even a late-night recommendation for something called milk wine, which you immediately decide to never ask about again. Some of the entries read like spells. One passage encouraged the reader to eat pomegranate seeds while staring at a mirror. Another describes a lustful sherbet to be brewed on Thursdays under the sign of Venus, using cinnamon bark, crushed apricot stones, and a single drop of rose oil. You don't know if it works, but it sounds delicious. The scribe reads on, clearly enjoying himself. A section on mood foods advises gentle stews for the melancholic, crisp flatbreads for the sluggish, and stirring broths with cumin for those afflicted by hesitation. There is, perhaps unsurprisingly, a short paragraph about aphrodisiacs, though most of them seem more likely to encourage sleep and seduction. Among the most frequently mentioned, saffron, ginger, fenugreek, cinnamon, and cloves. One recipe also involves something called aged garlic milk, which you decide not to visualize. Again, scholars aren't entirely sure whether these recipes were widely followed or simply ceremonial part of the performance of elite courtship. But what's clear is that food and sex were seen as twin arts, intertwined, prepared with care, meant to be savored. The texts remind readers to chew slowly, to speak little during meals, and never to rush directly from table to bed. That, they warn, leads to unrestful limbs and confused dreams. One long passage even compares a good lover to a good cook. He does not stir too quickly, nor leave the fire unattended. He watches, he adjusts, he tastes before serving. You close your eyes at that one, it's a bit much, but also oddly comforting, and maybe it makes sense. After all, these texts weren't just about pleasure, they were about preparation. Every detail mattered: the weight of your meal, the scent of your fingers, the timing of the moon, the placement of the pillows. Even the temperature of your feet gets a brief mention, with a warning that cold toes lead to withdrawal of enthusiasm. We've all been there. The scribe pauses finally and stretches again. His stomach now full, he pours himself a tiny cup of cardamom tea, takes a slow sip, and offers you one as well. You accept. It tastes warm and spicy, with just enough sweetness to make you feel like someone's grandmother is hovering nearby in approval. You both sit quietly for a few minutes, listening to the soft rustle of wind through fig leaves. No rush, nothing left to prove. It's strange how something as simple as a meal could be transformed into an act of romantic preparation. But then again, this entire culture, this entire night, is about slowing down, about taking time to notice the small things: texture, timing, temperature. A book of love in which cucumbers are the villain, and cumin gets an entire subplot. Eventually, the scribe sighs, satisfied. Well, he says, wiping his fingers on a clean cloth. Now we are ready to continue. The scribe refills his inkpot, brushes the crumbs of saffron rice from his robe, and gently places the food-stained manuscript back on the shelf. You follow him as he moves with deliberate calm, as though each step deserves its own tiny ceremony. He returns to his writing mat, stretches his legs with a sigh, and carefully rolls out a new sheet of paper. Now, he murmurs, dipping his pen, we write about positions. You raise an eyebrow. He smirks without looking up. Yes, that part. That before you imagine diagrams or awkward stick figures, you're reminded this is Persia, not a modern instruction manual. There are no crude illustrations here, no numbered systems or cold geometries. Instead, you get metaphors of birds in flight, rivers bending, palms turning toward the sun. The texts aren't interested in gymnastics, they're interested in grace. The scribe begins to write slowly, each word a carefully placed step in a very old dance. You lean closer and read along. The moon does not rush to rise. Neither should the beloved. The text begins with a gentle introduction, offering the idea that physical union is not a contest of strength, but a reflection of harmony. It acknowledges differences in body type, energy, flexibility, and temperament. What one couple finds easy, another may find uncomfortable, and that's all right. In fact, it's expected. The goal is not replication, it's adaptation. The manuscript goes on to name several postures of delight, each named for animals, celestial bodies, or seasonal winds. One is called the dove returning, another the arc of rain. You try to guess which is which, but quickly realize the descriptions are vague on purpose. The text doesn't want you to memorize, it wants you to imagine. The scribe chuckles as he writes one of the longer entries, the reading leopard. According to the manuscript, this posture requires balance, patience, and the ability to breathe deeply without collapsing. You imagine an actual leopard trying to read and immediately decide this one might be better left to scholars and acrobats. Historians still puzzle over how literal these names were. Some believe they were codes, used to obscure the content from less literate readers or nosy servants. Others argue that the metaphors were functional, meant to evoke not exact angles, but moods. A wind-blown branch sounds gentle and relaxed. A twisting lion sounds ... ambitious. You find a passage that stands out from the rest. The perfect position is the one in which both feel seen, not only touched. It's an idea that recurs often. The emphasis isn't on conquest or novelty, but on connection, the ability to be fully present with another person in that shared space of vulnerability. A recurring motif compares the moment of union to two mirrors facing one another, a strange, infinite reflection where ego dissolves and only sensation remains. Not all entries are lofty, though. One short paragraph describes a pose called the hidden jar, which the scribe finds so amusing he nearly snorts ink through his nose. It says here that this is best attempted only on the third night of spring, he says, grinning. When the knees are strong and the floor is warm, you raise your cup in mock salute to springtime knees. The text also includes guidance for how to respond if something goes wrong, if a position causes discomfort, or laughter, or a sudden leg cramp. In such cases, it advises the lovers to pause, laugh if needed, and resume the journey as if returning to a poem you had only half remembered. That phrase lingers with you, half remembered, because the truth is the body does forget things, especially in unfamiliar moments. And these manuals, far from being cold scripts, seem to expect that. They leave room for improvisation, for adjustment, even for failure. You realize the writers weren't just trying to preserve knowledge, they were trying to be kind. The scribe turns the page. The next section is devoted to mourning after positions. Yes, really. These are not sexual, they're sleep-related. How lovers might lie beside each other in ways that promote circulation, avoid indigestion, and, as one entry puts it, allow dreams to perch gently like the tails of two fish in calm water. One suggested pose involves holding hands loosely under the blanket. Another advises sleeping back to back so that the breath may travel without jealousy. You can't help but smile at the tenderness of it. Even the quiet act of sleep is given dignity here. A longer section follows on what the manuscript calls balance positions, meant not for pleasure but for healing. These are written in a more medical tone, advising certain postures to ease menstrual pain, align the lower back, or relieve melancholy. One entry gently suggests that lovers might even switch roles entirely, that the stronger one lie passive, and the quieter one lead. You tilt your head, progressive a little, but mostly it's just deeply observant. These writers knew the body wasn't a fixed instrument. It changed, it aged, it got injured, overworked, bored, frightened. And in every case, the answer was not dominance, but adaptation. There's even an appendix clearly added later with notes from a midwife. Her handwriting is looser, her tone practical. She recommends laying a folded shawl under the hips to relieve pressure and suggests that plumper lovers may find more comfort in postures involving less vertical enthusiasm. That line earns a real chuckle from the scribe. You stretch slightly where you sit, tempted to try out a few of the less ambitious options, but then remember this is a podcast and no one is grading your posture. So you simply shift deeper into the cushions, your breath slowing. Outside, the air has cooled. The lanterns flicker. A single owl calls once and is answered. You picture two owls perched somewhere unseen, exchanging gossip about the humans below. The scribe closes his ink bottle. The section is complete. He rolls the parchment carefully, wraps it in a soft cloth, and tucks it into a wooden scroll case engraved with floral patterns. As he does, he murmurs a line under his breath. Even in stillness, the body may speak. That, it seems, is the unspoken theme of everything you've read tonight. These manuals weren't about mastery or technique. They were about listening to breath, to pressure, to silence, to humor, to timing. They assumed you wouldn't always know what you were doing. They hoped you'd care enough to figure it out anyway. You and the scribe share a look, not of embarrassment, but appreciation. Then, quietly, he begins gathering his things. The lesson, for now, is done. The scrolls have been written. The metaphors, stretched and flowered to their poetic limits. The leopard has read. The fish have dreamed. And you at last lie still somewhere between history and sleep. The candles have melted halfway down their stems now, their tiny flames steady, unflickering like little breaths holding the silence. The courtyard beyond the scribe's chamber has hushed entirely, save for the rustling of a linen curtain stirred by a breeze. You sit deeper into the woven cushions, feeling not just sleepy but oddly full, as though each metaphor and moonlit maxim has become a sort of meal, slow-cooked in your brain. The scribe returns without a word, carrying a new scroll in his hands older than the rest, bound with a silken cord so faded it's nearly the same color as the parchment. He doesn't sit right away. Instead, he holds the scroll to the light and traces his fingers along the edge, almost like he's greeting an old friend. This one, he says finally, is less about what bodies do and more about what they are. He unties the ribbon. The script inside is darker, heavier, and more ornate than the others. Its opening lines are ceremonial. The body is a garden entrusted to the soul. What follows is not a manual in the usual sense. It's a reflection, a meditation on the meaning of desire, not just as a feeling or urge, but as a form of knowledge. You blink a little more awake. This sounds like philosophy or mysticism, or maybe both. The scribe begins to read aloud, but his voice is slower now, softer, shaped by reverence. The words float through the room like incense smoke. To know another is not only to enter them, but to be entered by memory, by rhythm, by silence. This isn't about performance. This is about presence. The scroll draws heavily from the language of Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam that values experience over doctrine and union with the divine through longing. In Sufi poetry, human love and divine love often blur. One becomes a metaphor for the other. The ache for closeness, for touch, becomes a way to glimpse something beyond the physical. Historians still argue whether these texts were actually meant for bedroom use, or whether they were devotional writings later misread as erotic. But the line is fine, and the imagery is often intentionally dual. One page describes the yearning of the palm to meet its twin, while another tells the story of two dancers who mirror one another so precisely that they forget who is leading. There's a beauty in the idea that intimacy isn't always about pleasure or even about bodies. Sometimes it's about recognition, about seeing yourself reflected in another and finding that you are still whole, still welcome, even in your strangeness. You glance at the next passage. It begins like a prayer. Blessed is the moment before the kiss, for in it lives both hope and humility. The scribe lets the silence settle after that one. No comment, no smile, just space. Then, quietly, he turns the page. The next section shifts tone slightly. It becomes a kind of ethical treatise, a guide not to acts, but to attitudes. The manuscript urges readers to approach intimacy not as a right or conquest, but as a trust. Something to be given and received with equal weight, a balance of listening and responding, of asking and waiting. One passage reads, "Do not mistake eagerness for readiness. The fruit may be sweet, but still unripe." Another, "Desire is not permission. It is only the door. You must still be invited in." You can almost hear modern readers sighing with admiration or perhaps envy. Here is a medieval text spelling out what many people still struggle to say plainly, that consent is not a formality, it's a living, shifting agreement. And that intimacy begins not with hands, but with awareness. There's a section that lists behaviors to cultivate in a lover: patience, humor, humility, attentiveness, gentleness, and perhaps most surprisingly, forgetfulness. Not in the sense of carelessness, but the ability to forgive, to let go of small failures, to allow moments of awkwardness or miscommunication to pass like shadows on the wall. One line stands out: "If the tongue stumbles, let the heart not bruise. Begin again, as dancers do." You breathe that one in like tea. The scroll turns more poetic now, slipping back into parable and symbol. There's a story about a young student who tries to master love through technique alone. He memorizes the positions, drinks the teas, even fasts for 40 days. But in every encounter, he finds himself hollow, unseen, until one night, a woman he barely knows places her hand over his heart and says, "You've practiced for everything but this. No name is given." The lesson is enough. The scribe sighs as he finishes that part. You realize he's not just reading this for you, he's remembering it for himself. These texts are not dusty archives to him. There's something living, something woven into the very rhythm of his life. And perhaps that's what makes this entire night feel so immersive. This wasn't abstract knowledge in its time, it was practical mysticism. Lived philosophy, something to feel in your breath and bones. You shift slightly, and the cushion gives with a soft whisper. The scribe notices, then turns one final page. Here, the scroll takes a sudden turn inward. The one who knows pleasure deeply must also know solitude. For to be whole in company, one must first be whole alone. A stillness fills the room. That line doesn't sparkle with wit or metaphors or bird names, but it lands, heavier than the rest. You feel it settle like dust in your lungs. It's a reminder that intimacy, for all its beauty, cannot complete you. It can only meet you. And that's perhaps the most radical idea in the scroll, not the metaphors. Not the positions or food or fragrances, but the insistence that you matter. That your body is not just a vessel for someone else's desire, but a home, a garden, a language. And that to enter another's world is not conquest, it is pilgrimage. The scribe finishes reading. He rolls the scroll close with a slowness that feels ceremonial, then places it gently on the shelf beside the others. He doesn't speak, neither do you. Outside, a dove calls once, then falls silent. The breeze returns, cooler now, and with it, a scent you can't name. Not spice, not rose, something older, like parchment. Or memory, you exhale. And for the first time tonight, it feels like you're not just learning about desire, you're resting in it. Floating gently in a space where the sacred and the sensual, the poetic and the practical, the body and the breath, all hold hands in the dark. The room is quieter now, as if the scroll itself asked for stillness after being read. A calm lingers in the corners of the walls. Even the breeze seems to hesitate at the threshold, uncertain whether to enter or simply observe. The scribe, perhaps sensing your thoughts, reaches for another scroll, this one bundled more loosely, as though it's been read often, casually, like an old favorite book passed between friends. This one, he says, is about how lovers begin. You glance at him, puzzled. Haven't we already begun? But he's quick to clarify. Not how lovers begin in the literal sense, not how they touch, or whisper, or position their limbs, but how they approach one another. How the moments before a desire are just as important, if not more so, than the acts themselves. He unties the scroll and begins to read. The tone here is softer than before, still poetic, but more intimate. Less ceremonial, more like someone scribbling secrets they want only a close friend to know. It opens with a line that already feels familiar. Most pleasures are spoiled not by the act, but by the arrival. The idea is simple. That rushing, expectation, nervousness, these are the enemies of connection. That good lovers don't leap forward, but tune in. They study the room. They listen with their skin. They arrive slowly, as though entering a sacred place barefoot and breathless. The scribe pauses, tapping his reed pen gently against the floor. It's less about choreography, he says, and more about atmosphere. The manuscript continues with passages describing ideal settings, not just physically, but emotionally. A good beginning, it says, does not start with touch. It starts with removal of distraction, of tension, of noise. It suggests bathing not for cleanliness, but for shedding the dust of the day. Changing into soft clothing not for beauty, but comfort. Preparing tea, burning incense, brushing the hair slowly like a ritual. There's even a line that says, the body must be made to feel like it has time. Otherwise, it will guard itself. Historians still debate how widespread these ideas were in actual Persian homes. Some argue they represent elite court culture, an idealized version of domestic life only achievable by the wealthy or scholarly. Others claim these ideas were aspirational, but rooted in daily practice, especially among urban middle-class couples who had access to books and bathhouses. Whatever the truth, the scroll insists, it is the approach that makes everything else possible. It advises lovers to speak very little in the beginning, but when they do, to say things like, "You are here now," or "Let us begin without ending anything." Slightly strange, yes, but you get the idea. There's a stillness being cultivated here. A shared space of permission and presence. Some of the scroll's suggestions are charmingly odd. One passage encouraged couples to begin by sharing a fruit, a fig or pear, cut slowly between them, each bite taken in silence. Another recommends placing a mirror between them for a few minutes to observe their own stillness before it is broken. You're not sure how practical that is, but it certainly paints a picture. You come across a story written in the margins, a little fable about a man who tried to impress a woman with an elaborate poem, only to discover she had memorized his favorite one years ago. Their intimacy, the story suggests, began not when they touched, but when they realized they already spoke the same secret language. It's a reminder that beginnings don't start from zero. They begin with echoes, familiarities, the way someone tilts their head, the scent they wear, a shared silence that doesn't feel awkward. One passage even compares the start of intimacy to lighting a lamp in a dark room. You do not shout at the lamp to glow. You coax it gently and wait. There's something profoundly respectful in that idea. That touch is not a demand, but a question. That every movement forward should be like knocking on a door you're not sure will open, and being okay if it doesn't. The manuscript includes a list titled The 4 Signs of Readiness, each delightfully vague. The eyes have slowed. The breath forgets it is being watched. Laughter comes without apology. The hands know what they are not allowed to do. The scribe smirks at that last one. Even now, he says, that's the hardest one to master. He flips the page. Now the text takes a deeper turn, focusing on emotional readiness, what it means to actually be present with another person and not just physically available. There's a line that says, if you are carrying something heavy, the one you touch will feel it, whether they know why or not. You pause. That feels accurate. Like one of those truths that floats under the surface of experience but rarely gets named. The scroll advises readers to delay intimacy when they are angry, bitter, afraid, or distracted. Not because those feelings are wrong, but because they are loud, and they speak over the quiet voice of connection. One short section offers a breathing exercise. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 2, exhale for 6. Repeat until your body no longer flinches. Only then should you move closer. It's unclear whether this was meant as spiritual preparation or something more practical, but either way, it feels like advice we could all use, even now, hundreds of years later. There's another story in the margins, this one from a female scholar who writes about her teacher's first lesson. Instead of instructions, the teacher simply handed her a cup of warm milk and said, learn to hold something without spilling it. For days she practiced, holding, breathing, not rushing. Only later did she realize the lesson wasn't about the milk. It was about presence, about not gripping too tightly, about recognizing when your own hands are the thing making the surface ripple. The scroll continues for several pages, gradually becoming more poetic, almost dreamlike. Begin not with lips, but with listening. Let your silence be a gift, not a gap. If you must speak, speak as the wind does, softly and in circles. It's like being rocked gently to sleep by someone who once tried to flirt with a cloud. You glance over at the scribe. He's reading quietly now, lips moving but no sound. His eyes move slowly, like a student rereading a beloved letter. He reaches the end of the scroll, touches the final sentence with his fingertip, and lets out a breath that feels less like conclusion and more like release. He rolls up the scroll, not tightly, but loosely, like he knows he'll be coming back to it soon. Outside, a cat passes silently across the tiled courtyard, pausing only to look up at the moon. Somewhere behind you, a cup shifts on a silver tray, and you realize you hadn't even noticed how still you've become. And perhaps that's the lesson of this section, not a technique or a formula, but a state. A way of being before anything ever begins. The way you sit when you know someone's about to speak. The way your heart slows when you're finally home. The way 2 people can occupy the same silence and feel like something important is happening, even if neither of them can explain what. You close your eyes. No need to start. You're already there. The scroll now lies on the scribe's lap, its final words still warm in the air like steam rising from freshly poured tea. You don't speak. You don't need to. There's a richness in this quiet that feels earned, like the hush after a ceremony, or the softness that lingers at the edges of a dream. But the scribe isn't done. Not yet. From behind him, he retrieves a flat wooden box. its surface stained with use and engraved with something that looks like a sun tangled in vines. He lifts the lid and reveals an assortment of folded slips notes, fragments, marginalia. Thoughts too brief or too personal to be copied into the official texts. Some are smudged, some barely legible, some written in handwriting so fine it looks like it might float off the page if breathed on. These, he says quietly, are the secrets. You lean closer. He selects a note and begins to read. This one is titled simply, Of Shyness and Laughter. It is written that laughter at the beginning of love is a gift from the divine. For only when the heart feels safe does the body allow foolishness. It's not a full paragraph, just 2 lines really, but it stays with you. Because it makes you think of all those little moments we often gloss over. The shared smile after an awkward bump. The sudden giggle when a gesture doesn't quite land. This manuscript doesn't see laughter as a failure of intimacy. It sees it as a mark of it. There's another scrap, this one clearly older. The ink is faded, and the edge has been chewed by time, or maybe by some distracted scholar with a nervous chewing habit. It reads, when a lover stutters, do not correct them. Their words are already doing their best to undress themselves. You both smile. Not because it's clever, though it is, but because it's kind. There's a current of gentleness in these notes, as if all these long-dead scribes were whispering across centuries. Be patient. People are fragile, and that's part of the beauty. Historians still debate the origins of these loose notes. Were they from students? Lovers? Traveling poets? Some argue they were added by the wives and daughters of the scribes, those who read the official scrolls and thought, yes, but here's what you forgot. One note, clearly written in a different hand, suggests that eye contact should be treated as both invitation and mirror. Another simply says, never begin with apologies. The scribe reads a slightly longer one, next less poetic, more practical. It outlines what the anonymous writer calls the 4 softnesses, or the things that should be soft in any moment of closeness. The lighting, the voice, the skin, the expectations. That last one makes you blink. Because how often do we enter even our most intimate moments carrying unspoken scripts fantasies, fears, imagine reactions, and then feel confused when reality doesn't align? This note reminds you, it's okay to arrive empty-handed. In fact, it might be better. The scribe smooths the slip gently before placing it aside. Then he reads another. Do not expect your partner to know your silence. Teach them. Let them study you like a book they have chosen, not a map they are forced to memorize. Again, it's not grand, not revolutionary, but it's so human. You shift slightly where you sit, reminded of every time you've ever expected someone to read your mind. Every moment you assumed your sigh meant the same thing to them that it did to you. Maybe you've been the unreadable book more times than you like to admit. The scroll fragments keep coming. Each one a breath, a pause, a truth shaped by someone else's long ago fingertips. And slowly, you begin to realize these weren't written for publication. They weren't part of any scholarly collection. They were scribbled in margins, passed between lovers, tucked beneath pillows. These were lovers disguised as footnotes, and they're not always serious. One note reads, if your partner begins to speak in verse, kiss them quickly before they get worse. Another warns, beware the one who quotes too much Rumi before bed. They are likely to cry after, and yet beneath the teasing is affection. These notes weren't trying to impress. They were trying to connect, to remember, to leave behind something honest in a world full of performances. There's a tiny, nearly illegible scrap at the bottom of the box, barely the size of a coin. It's crumpled, blotched, and clearly passed through many hands. The scribe reads it carefully. When you are old, may you be touched like something still curious. Not with duty, but with wonder. You don't realize you've gone completely still. That line settles on your chest like a warm stone. Because it's not about sex. It's not even about romance. It's about the deep, aching human hope that we might still be seen as something beautiful, surprising, worth exploring even after years. Even after mistakes, even after the brightness of youth has quieted. That hope is what threads all of these notes together. And maybe that's what the scribes themselves were trying to protect. Not just technique, or poetry, or etiquette, but wonder. The fragile awe that two people might find each other again and again without needing to be new. Just real. The scribe closes the box and places it gently back on the shelf, his fingers lingering a little longer than necessary on the lid. He doesn't speak. You don't ask him to. Outside, the night is beginning its descent into that rarest kind of silence, the one that doesn't ask for sleep, only stillness. Even the stars seem to be listening now, and as you lie back, your thoughts no longer darting but drifting, you realize something strange and a little lovely. You've spent hours listening to love letters written to no one in particular, and yet somehow, they all feel like they were meant for you. The room holds its breath as the scribe opens a narrow cabinet, smaller than the rest, worn smooth around the handle like it has been opened many times, but only by a trusted hand. Inside is just one scroll. There's no gold trimming or elaborate calligraphy, just faded ink and rough parchment. But the scribe handles it more gently than any before. This one, he says softly, is for those who had to love in silence. You shift slightly. You think you understand, but as he begins to read, you realize this scroll isn't just about shyness. It's about the kind of love that was never allowed to speak its name. The scroll opens with a simple invocation. There are gardens behind walls, and there are hearts behind silence. Not all lovers are allowed to be loud. From the first line, it's clear this manuscript belonged to a world behind closed doors, a world of glances, half-written poems, and footsteps carefully timed in quiet courtyards. The words are more cautious here, veiled in metaphors, careful with their rhythm. And yet, somehow, the emotions come through louder than ever. You imagine what it might have meant to write this? The quiet courage required, the risk, the longing. Some historians argue this scroll was penned by those in forbidden relationships, same-gender lovers, widows, servants, or members of rival households. Others say it was written by poets imagining what love might be like in impossible situations. Either way, it speaks the same language, one of restraint, care, and deep, deep tenderness. There's a passage describing how two lovers would meet in a public bathhouse, never touching, never speaking, only exchanging rings under the water. Another tells of two women who left tiny dried petals wrapped in cotton and tucked beneath one another's market baskets. The scroll lists gestures of coded affection, fingers brushing as one passes a bowl, synchronized prayers during the afternoon call, sharing a bench but looking opposite ways while their hands rest close enough to sense warmth. It's a catalog of hidden lives, intimate and aching. One line reads, "To brush the back of a hand and feel it burn all the way to your chest. This is how the forbidden speaks." The scribe reads it aloud and lets the silence afterward linger like the scent of old perfume. It's not just what's written, it's what's implied, what hangs in the pauses between words. These lovers didn't have poems or portraits. They had glances, shadows, coincidences. And yet, they created meaning from these fragments. The scroll continues with practical guidance on what the writer calls invisible intimacy. It describes the act of lighting the same candle at the same time each night from separate rooms, of leaving chalk symbols on a shared stone wall, of mirroring gestures during prayers. One line suggests that lovers pick a constellation and both look to it at the same hour, hundreds of miles apart, believing they are seen by the same light. You smile not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. It's what people do when they can't be near each other. They invent ways to feel like they are. There are also entries with a more playful tone. One warns, beware the lover who quotes too much Rumi before bed. They are likely to cry after. Another gently teases, if your lover starts to speak in verse, kiss them before they get worse. Even in secrecy, there's humor. Even in constraint, joy finds a way. Some of the most moving parts of the scroll are the short blessings left unsigned, as if to protect the names behind them. One reads, "May your names outlive your silence. May your touch survive your hiding. May your joy be known, if not by the world, then by each other." The scribe's voice softens at that line, his fingers tracing the faded ink, and for a long moment he doesn't speak at all. As you listen, something settles inside you, a quiet awareness that not every love is written in grand gestures or remembered in songs. Some loves grow in the corners, in the margins. They survive not through permission, but through invention. This scroll is not a celebration of secrecy, but a record of resilience. It is evidence that love does not vanish just because no one is watching. If anything, it sharpens in the dark. A brief tale buried in the center of the scroll recounts the story of two nightingales who lived in the same tree but sang at different hours. So the villagers never realized their songs were meant for one another. It's a fable, clearly, but the meaning is unmistakable. These lovers didn't need public approval. They needed only each other and a time to sing, even if never together. The scroll never grows bitter. That's perhaps its most surprising quality. There is sadness, yes, and yearning, but also grace. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't argue for justice. It simply documents what was, the touch of a shared brush, the coin passed hand to hand, the heat of recognition, the decision to love anyway. In its final passage, the scroll reflects on what it means to exist without a name in history. We loved. We did not speak of it. We survived. Let that be enough. The scribe reads this slowly, reverently. He closes the scroll with quiet hands and places it back in the small cabinet. He does not lock it. He doesn't need to. Some scrolls are safe simply because they've finally been heard. The breeze outside stirs again, carrying the scent of jasmine and something deeper, maybe memory, maybe mourning, maybe the quiet joy of being known. You exhale slowly, not wanting to break the stillness that has wrapped itself around the room. For a few moments, no one speaks, and yet everything has been said. You lean back, letting your body soften into the cushions. Perhaps the lesson isn't in what was forbidden, but in what endured anyway. In the creativity, the patience, the thousand tiny ways that people have reached across walls and fear and time to say, I see you. I remember you. I loved you once, and I do still. The shutter creaks faintly again, just once, as the night air thickens around you, warm and unmoving. The scribe does not hurry. He lets the hush settle before pulling out the next scroll, a taller one than before. This scroll has weight to it, not just in size but in tone. The parchment is dense, the edges harden like old bread left near a hearth. And unlike the others, which have danced between poetry and parable, this one gets straight to the point. No metaphors, no riddles. Just a direct line from the past to the present. This scroll, the scribe says as he unrolls it, was for the newlywed. His tone holds no mockery, just a quiet respect. And as the parchment unfurls, the script sharpens into formal lines, sectioned headings, and numbered instructions. You realize quickly that this is no dreamy ode to love. It is a guidebook. Practical, sincere, and oddly full of care. The first section is titled On Affection and Frequency. It opens with a sentence that feels startlingly modern. A healthy union welcomes closeness often, but without measure that becomes pressure. The manual doesn't offer arbitrary rules or mystical ratios. It insists that desire is fluid. Some people feel it daily, others less, and both, it says, are worthy of kindness. One line reads, "Let not the hunger of one become the burden of the other." If desire is not mutual, there may still be tenderness in tea. It suggests sharing fruit, washing feet, or simply placing a hand on the back of the other's neck. These, it claims, are also acts of love. You're surprised by how grounded the tone is, not clinical, not mystical, just present. There's a steady undercurrent of thoughtfulness running through every instruction. Historians still debate how widely these manuals were used. Some say they were reserved for the elite. Others believe simplified versions made their way into rural communities. Either way, their survival suggests something remarkable. Someone thought it was worth writing down how to be gentle with a partner. The next section is called of movements and stillnesses. Here, the scroll becomes more intimate. It advises that physical connection should never begin with a goal, but with observation. A person's breath, posture, and pace are all part of the conversation. The scroll reads, "A lover who rushes may reach the body, but never the person." There's a metaphor nestled in the lines, comparing touch to entering a temple quietly, reverently, with your shoes already off in your heart. It warns against assumptions, too. One passage advises that the body is not a field to be conquered, but a garden to be tended, and even the best gardeners must wait for the season. Every body carries its own clock, it says. If it creaks, do not push harder. Pour oil, wait. The message repeats itself throughout. Patience is not the absence of action, but the practice of attention. The scroll even lists gestures, not explicit acts, but suggestions for presence. Holding a wrist lightly, tracing the line of a shoulder, whispering into the crook of the arm. All things meant not to escalate, but to communicate. I'm here, I see you. You are safe, and unexpectedly, the text offers room for failure. It includes a short section titled "When the Moment Passes," where it calmly states, "If closeness becomes awkward, be glad it began at all. Let laughter be the blanket that covers the unfinished fire. There's no shame offered. Just tea, quiet, and a second chance." You begin to sense a rhythm to these teachings. They are not about performance. They are about being with. One especially tender line reads, "If your hand cannot bring pleasure, let it bring stillness." It reminds you that sometimes simply lying beside someone, breathing together without words, is the most intimate act possible. Later in the scroll is a brief section on what it calls unexpected joys. These are moments to be celebrated rather than corrected. Knocking over a candle, laughing mid-kiss, saying the wrong name by mistake, not out of infidelity, but from nerves. It gently notes, if you trip over your own robe and they laugh instead of judging, keep them. The advice is practical, but layered with emotional wisdom. Whoever wrote this had made mistakes, and they knew enough to write them down. Then comes a passage titled "Closeness Beyond Desire." Here, the scroll shifts again. It speaks not of passion, but of presence. What happens after the intimacy, after the laughter, after the conversation ends and sleep looms near? The text reads, "After the skin is quiet and the breath has slowed, stay. Let stillness be your final kindness." It advises not to leave the room immediately, not to let the silence feel like abandonment. Simply remain. Let the other person feel that they are not only wanted, but kept. You're struck by how little the scroll talks about how to love and how much it focuses on how to stay. As if the writers knew that anyone could spark connection, but the greater art was in not extinguishing it. Near the end of the scroll, a final section appears. Titled "Departures," it is just a few lines long. If you must leave the bed, do not do so suddenly. Let your warmth remain a little longer than your body. Let them believe you might return. It doesn't demand endless togetherness. It simply encourages thoughtfulness in absence. Even in leaving, there is a way to love. The scribe finishes reading and lets the final words drift into the space between you. He doesn't roll the scroll back up right away. He keeps it open on his lap, eyes lowered. Outside, the sky has faded into that pale shade that arrives just before the first. Birds sing a blues so tired it looks like it slept in its clothes. You lie back and let the words echo inside you. Not just the poetry of past scrolls, but the practical tenderness of this one. You think about how many of these small teachings have been lost. How many people rush through touch, through silence, through goodbyes, never knowing they were holding centuries of forgotten wisdom in their hands? Maybe the scroll wasn't written for experts. Maybe it was for anyone who has ever fumbled, ever feared they were doing it wrong, ever loved someone and not known how to show it without stumbling. This isn't a manual for passion. It's a guide for presence. And as your eyes flutter closed, you carry with you the gentle instructions of strangers long gone who once whispered across parchment, love gently, stay longer, leave warmth behind. The room is still, the kind of stillness that doesn't beg for words. You lie back, letting the echo of the scroll settle in your chest. The scribe reaches for another, not with urgency, but with care, as though each piece of parchment deserves a breath between. This one he lifts with both hands, as if it contains not just ink, but time. The scroll is older. You can see it in the fading of the script, the slight cracking at the edges. Yet somehow the air around it feels warm, like it's been opened many times before and always with fondness. As he unrolls it, the first title appears, of shared nights and daily mornings. Unlike the previous scrolls, which focused on touch, timing, or restraint, this one appears to be about something far more mundane and, in its way, more intimate. This is a manual for living with someone, sharing space, sharing time, making the hours in between intimacy meaningful, not just tolerable. A different kind of closeness. The opening line reads, "Love does not end with the extinguishing of candles. It continues in the making of lentils." And just like that, you're in another world, not the private chambers of passion, but the clatter of clay pots, the folding of beds, the sweep of shared daily rhythm. There's something deeply comforting about this shift. It feels quieter, less heightened, but no less sacred. The scroll is organized almost like a diary of advice entries titled not with numbers, but with times of day. Before dawn, mid-morning, late afternoon, evening, in silence. Each entry offers simple guidance for sustaining tenderness through life's ordinary movements. Under before dawn, for instance, the advice is brief but evocative. If you rise first, do not wake them with sound. Wake them with scent bread, mint, warmth from the kettle. It turns a morning routine into an act of gentle hospitality. Not performance, not grand gesture, just a quiet, fragrant offering that says, "You are safe, and I thought of you before the day did." In the mid-morning entry, the scroll reflects on arguments. Yes, even the gentle people of these scrolls argued. The passage says, "If sharpness must come, let it come like the shadow of a tree defined, but cool." It advises speaking only after boiling water has had time to settle, and never from across the room. Walk close before words. There's something wonderfully old-fashioned and wise about this. The scroll knows that disagreement is not failure, it's the tone that matters. If you must raise your voice, do so only to call them home. Historians still discuss how literally to take these scrolls. Some argue they were ideals aspirational, not always practiced. Others believe they were practical guides for middle-class households, especially in urban centers like Isfahan or Bukhara, where space was shared and privacy was rare. The truth likely lives somewhere between, but what's undeniable is the emotional intelligence in the writing. These were not texts focused on control or domination. They assumed mutual care, mutual labor, mutual softness. The late afternoon passage is perhaps the most beautifully domestic. It talks about the ritual of returning home, whether from the market, the mosque, the fields, or the study. It advises that the first thing offered upon arrival should be neither complaint nor news, but water. There's a calming logic to it. People are softer when they're not thirsty. The scroll even suggests that feet be washed not just for cleanliness, but as an act of welcome. The dust of the day deserves kindness, not blame. There's also a passage noting that sometimes silence is more sacred than greeting. If the day has been heavy, the scroll says, then a hand on the back might speak more clearly than words. You're struck by how this scroll weaves affection into the tiniest details of life. It even addresses shared chores. One line reads, "The washing of dishes is not a burden when each cup is a memory." It encouraged partners to cook together, but not always at the same time. Take turns. Let each feed the other with their style. There's advice on sweeping and folding blankets. None of it is grand. All of it is infused with meaning. The scroll doesn't shy away from fatigue either. In the section titled Evening in Silence, it acknowledges that not every night is romantic or even friendly. Some evenings are tired, some tense, some full of nothing. But even then, the scroll says, be near. Not talking is not absence. Let your body be present, even if your heart has wandered off for a while. You think of all the times you or someone you've loved has sat just near enough to feel seen, but far enough to be left alone. This scroll names that as love too. One entry offers suggestions for small, shared habits that build affection over time, learning one another's favorite tea temperature, checking in before prayer, lighting the lamp before they ask, tucking a scarf around the shoulders without comment. The writer notes, if you can predict their sleaze, you have already married their soul. You laugh softly. It's not a joke exactly, but it is. The scroll touches briefly on disagreements again, this time advising that apologies be made not just in words, but in small offerings, a well-cut fruit, a warm towel, a shared moment of quiet breath. It says, if you cannot say, forgive me, then let your hand say it. This, you realize, is what all the scrolls seem to believe at their core, that bodies speak, that gestures carry meaning, that love is most visible in what is repeated. As the scribe finishes reading, he rolls the scroll slowly, almost reluctantly. He looks at you, not directly, but in that way people do when they know you're still holding something inside. And you are. You're holding the image of two people folding a blanket in silence. You're holding the idea that love is not always loud or even felt, but still present, woven into how we make tea, how we leave a room, how we breathe near someone else, even when we have no words. Outside, the early morning light has begun to stretch its pale arms across the sky. The birds are still quiet, but the world is clearly thinking about waking up. You're not ready. Not yet. There's still time for one more breath, one more pause, one more piece of someone else's memory to settle into your own. This scroll has reminded you that intimacy isn't just passion or poetry. It's washing dishes. It's preparing lentils. It's knowing the difference between I'm fine and I need you to ask again. It's lighting a lamp not for yourself, but because you know they'll be home soon. It's choosing presence again and again, even on days when you feel like folding inward. It's the smallest act of care made over and over until it becomes its own kind of devotion. And that, you think, is something worth remembering. The scribe doesn't speak as he selects the next scroll. His hands move slowly now, as if even lifting the parchment requires reverence. You've noticed it before, this sense that the quieter the words inside, the softer he becomes. This scroll is small, narrow, and bound with a strip of blue silk. There's no visible title, just a single pressed flower tucked under the ribbon. It crumbles slightly as he removes it, and the scent it releases, dried lavender, maybe blends into the already thick air of night. You lean in. You're ready. Without preamble, he begins to read. The voice on the scroll is older than the others, more reflective. Less instructional, more observational. The first passage reads, some unions are easy. Others are made in the long, uneven silence between two sighs. From the first lines, you understand, this scroll is about repair. About what happens when closeness frays, not because of betrayal, not because of distance, but because of the slow erosion that comes from daily life, unspoken thoughts, and the wear of time. The scroll calls this the quiet undoing. It describes the way lovers grow unfamiliar, not in grand moments of drama, but through small hesitations, a missed goodnight, A teacup set down without eye contact, an embrace that ends too soon. These are the things the scroll names, not to shame, but to mark. To notice is to begin mending, it says, and love, like cloth, may be mended at the edge. This section begins where many relationships falter, not in a storm, but in the fog. One line stands out when words no longer fit, reach instead for rhythm. It suggests dancing slowly without music, not to entertain, but to align. It advises touch with no goal, eye contact with no urgency, a shared room where neither speaks, but both choose to stay. Historians still argue whether this scroll was intended for married couples, estranged lovers, or spiritual partners going through emotional drought. It's possible it served all of these. What's clear is that the writer knew the contours of tension intimately. There's a passage where a man offers his wife a bowl of figs after a long silence. She does not respond, but later she places one in his satchel for the journey. No apology is spoken. No breakthrough happens, but they share the fruit. And for the scroll, that is enough. There's something achingly honest in this scroll's refusal to demand resolution. It does not promise reconnection. It merely makes space for it. One line advises, "Do not ask, are we all right?" in the middle of the wound. Instead, wipe the table. Warm the room. Make it easier to return. You can feel the depth in that. The difference between confrontation and invitation. The scroll includes a section titled Signs of Readiness. It lists simple markers that someone is open to reconnection, the shift in posture, the absence of barriers, the willingness to linger after a task is done. It reads, "They will not tell you with words. They will leave the door ajar." It also notes signs of need, sharper tone, restless hands, the turning away before answering. If they are louder than usual, they may be asking for quiet. The text teaches a kind of emotional fluency, one written not in speech, but in gesture. You're struck again by how non-judgmental the scroll remains. There is no blame. It doesn't paint one person as withholding, the other as wounded. It sees disconnection as something that happens between, not two. One passage reads, "When the fire grows low, do not blame the wood, add breath, add time." The scroll does eventually offer techniques, not solutions, but openings. One of the most surprising is mirroring mundane acts. It encourages a kind of quiet imitation, folding your clothes when they do, standing at the same window they look out of, walking in step beside them, even in silence. Not because it will fix things, but because it reminds the body that togetherness still exists. The text reads, "Even if you cannot speak the same language today, walk the same path." It is enough. Another practice it offers is listening without reacting. It advises not to respond immediately to criticism, but to absorb it, sit with it, and revisit it after tea. Heat cools. Words soften, return with open palms. And it reminds readers that most anger masks something quieter beneath. Disappointment, fatigue, fear of not being seen. Do not fight the surface. Dive gently for the root. You notice that as the scroll continues, it begins to lighten very subtly. It offers small glimpses of recovery, laughter over a dropped spoon, the unconscious reach for the other's hand during prayer, a song hummed that the other recognizes. The scroll celebrates these moments not as triumphs, but as signs of soil softening. The ground does not bloom overnight, it says, but it will no longer resist the seed. Perhaps the most moving entry comes under the title After Return. It speaks to the fragility of reconnection, how even after a night of quiet closeness, doubt can still creep in. Do not ask if it is over. Instead, thank them for the moment. Let the next moment come on its own. The scroll ends with a final image, 2 clay bowls placed side by side, neither full, but neither empty, one slightly chipped, one still warm. Together they hold enough, it says. The scribe finishes reading, and for a long time he does not move. The room feels heavier, not with sadness, but with recognition. This scroll has spoken to the part of you that knows love isn't always sweet. Sometimes it is brittle. Sometimes it is thread stretched too tight, frayed from both ends, held together only by choice. But this scroll reminds you that choice repeated, quiet daily, is its own kind of miracle. You exhale slowly. You can feel your heartbeat in your fingers now. The night hasn't ended, but it's deepened. And in this depth, you understand something more clearly than before, that love is not kept alive by perfect words or flawless moments. It is kept alive by returning again and again, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. The scribe doesn't speak this time. He doesn't need to. You can tell by the way his hand hovers over the next scroll that this one is different, smaller. Yes, and worn nearly translucent in places, as if it had been unrolled and reread so many times that the parchment itself began to thin. He opens it slowly, carefully, and as he does, the scent of rose water, faint and old, rises into the air. This is not a scroll of instruction. This is a scroll of memory. The first words are a whisper across time. We were not the grandest love. We were the one that lingered. It's clear immediately. This scroll is not about beginnings or endings, but about what remains. The quiet, almost invisible traces of love left behind in the world. In a spoon placed back in the drawer, handle down. In the rhythm of footsteps that still unconsciously match. In the smell of oil rubbed into dry skin at nightfall. This scroll is about what love becomes when it has been allowed to last. You find yourself picturing two people who've lived beside each other so long their bodies no longer startle. There's no fire, no whirlwind, just warmth that doesn't flicker. One line says, after 10 winters, the hand does not reach to ignite, it rests like embers. This scroll doesn't idealize long love, it simply notices it. The dry humor, the rituals, the sacredness of routine. Historians still debate the origins of this scroll. Some claim it was written by an elderly couple in Shiraz who ran a modest tea house in Qapid. Small verses for travelers in exchange for news. Others think it may have been a literary exercise, a fiction imagined by younger writers, hoping to glimpse what love might feel like once the edges had softened. Whatever the case, the wisdom in it is real. One passage describes the moment you stop trying to impress someone you love, not out of carelessness, but trust. When you walk into a room and your shirt is inside out, and they fix it without teasing you, that is love's quiet arrival. Another line remarks that the moment you can both eat in silence without discomfort, you've reached a kind of sacred milestone. You think of all the modern stories that center on beginnings, first touches, first nights, first declarations. But this scroll is full of afters, after the illness, after the miscarriage, after the move, after the silence that lasted 2 days longer than it should have, and still there they are, boiling lentils, lighting the oil lamp, saying, "Did you sleep?" Even when they already know the answer. The scroll doesn't hide the frictions either. It talks about the repetition of small annoyances, the way they oversalt the food, forget to latch the door, tell the same story to guests every time. But it treats these not as flaws, but familiar shadows in a beloved room. Love does not remove dust, the scroll says. It learns where it settles and leaves room for it. There's an entry titled Old Arguments, and it's written almost like a play. 2 voices. One says, "You always forget the spice." The other replies, "Because you always remind me." I thought it was our tradition. You smile. It's not sarcasm, it's companionship shaped over years. A kind of shared stagecraft where even the arguments are rehearsed with care. Later, there's a list called Unusual Signs of Love after 20 years. Folding their scarf the way they like, even if it makes no sense to you. Letting them win the argument about which path leads to the bakery. Knowing which silence means tired and which means thinking. Placing your hand on their back during a funeral and keeping it there a moment longer than necessary, always making sure the heavier blanket is on their side. These aren't declarations, they're footprints. Evidence that love stayed long enough to grow roots. You reach a section called Shared Illness, and the scroll's tone softens even further. It speaks of how the body becomes both a refuge and a burden, of how lovers must learn to shift roles, not always equally, not always with grace, but with intention. It says, when one cannot rise, the other must carry the rituals of love, bringing tea, brushing hair, adjusting cushions. Love in illness is not the refusal of despair, but the insistence on comfort despite it. It's not dramatic, not poetic. It is simply honest. There's a beautiful passage about sleep titled The Distance Between Two Pillows. It reflects on how, over time, people learn to sleep apart and together. It says, there are nights when they will turn away and you must not follow. There are nights when they will reach for you in their sleep and you must be there. It's a meditation on physical closeness and emotional boundaries, of loving someone enough to let them sleep facing the wall, because, they'll turn back when the dream ends. You wonder how many lovers tried and failed to live up to this scroll. Or perhaps how many loved this way without realizing they were following its teachings. It doesn't expect perfection. That's part of its grace. One line reads, there were days when we did not like each other. We still passed the bread. There's a kind of peace in that, a reminder that love is not a feeling. It is a decision made again and again, with hands that may be tired but still open. The scroll concludes not with a grand statement, but a reflection. If I could not remember your face, I would still remember your walk. If I forgot your name, I would remember the way you stirred your tea. If I forgot even your voice, I would know the weight of you when you sit beside me. These are the things that linger, it seems to say. Not the moments of fire, but the weight, the shape, the rhythm of another life moving alongside yours. The scribe closes the scroll slowly. He does not roll it tightly as he has with others. Instead, he folds it loosely and lays the blue ribbon across it like a blanket. His silence now feels not empty, but full. Full of everything that wasn't said because it didn't need to be. You lie back, the cool of the floor seeping into your skin, grounding you. You let the words of the scroll wrap around your heart like a well-worn quilt. You think of your own rituals, how you hang your towel, the way you greet the people you love, the tea you make without asking how they take it. These are your footprints, your rituals, your scroll still being written. And in this moment, you understand, love does not have to glow. It does not need to sing. Sometimes it only needs to stay, to be quiet, to keep making tea even after the argument, to keep returning, to keep remembering which side of the blanket is heavier and never letting it go to waste. There's a hush in the room that no candle could compete with now. Even the scribe moves more slowly, as if his limbs understand that the night is almost spent. His fingers reach for the final scrolls, like someone choosing the last piece of fruit in a bowl, not because it's the best, but because it's the one that remained. What comes next is not an instruction manual, nor a love letter, nor a parable. It is instead a scroll written entirely in imagined conversation. A series of questions and responses between two unnamed figures, perhaps lovers, perhaps not. The title at the top is just 3 words, when you ask. The first line speaks as if mid-thought. What do you want from me? The reply, to know you even when you change. And just like that, the tone is set. This scroll is about adaptation. The long, winding process of rediscovering someone over time. How even the people we know best are constantly shifting, and how love means staying curious, even when it's hard. Each exchange on the scroll is short but layered. What if I become colder? Then I will sit nearer to you. It's not romantic in the sweeping sense. There are no declarations of eternal passion. But there is something far deeper, an enduring willingness to listen to who someone is now, even if that's not who they were before. Historians still puzzle over the purpose of this scroll. It doesn't seem religious nor poetic in the traditional form. Some believe it was part of a therapeutic ritual where couples read and recited the scroll together during times of transition. Others think it was simply a personal text, one writer working through their own long-term relationship in the only way they knew how, dialogue. One exchange reads, "What if I stop loving the same things? Then I'll learn to watch you love something new." It makes you pause because you know this feeling. The subtle grief of watching someone evolve away from what once bonded you. But here, the scroll doesn't offer resistance. It offers companionhood. What if I no longer need you? Then I'll be proud that you can stand without leaning. There's pain in that, yes, but also a rare kind of grace. It allows love to mature beyond possession, beyond even mutual dependence. This isn't the kind of love most people dream of when they're young, but perhaps it's the only kind that truly lasts. The scroll isn't all solemnity, though. There are glimpses of gentle humor, too. What if you start snoring? Then I will compose a symphony around your breath. What if I eat the last fig again? Then I'll forgive you by the next moon. These aren't jokes so much as small signs of deep familiarity humor as glue, not escape. The text knows that levity is just as vital as loyalty. And in between the questions, there are small, single-line observations from a third voice, perhaps the narrator, or perhaps the text itself becoming self-aware. These lines say things like, "Love asks more than it answers." The future cannot be fixed. It can only be met. You do not need to know where they're going to walk beside them. You start to understand the pattern. The scroll isn't a dialogue between two perfect people. It's a roadmap for imperfection, for coping with the evolution of bodies, minds, and needs without giving up on the promise of care. Later in the scroll, the questions shift slightly. They become more existential. What if I am tired of myself? Then I will remind you who you are to me. What if I forget how to love? Then I will love louder until you remember. These are the moments where the text borders on something spiritual, not in doctrine, but in devotion. A belief that love is not just a feeling, it's an ongoing practice, especially in the face of change. Then comes perhaps the most powerful exchange in the scroll. What if I hurt you without meaning to? Then I will ask if you are still the one who loves me. And what if I am? Then we begin again. There it is. The entire philosophy of this scroll condensed into 4 lines. That the goal isn't to prevent hurt altogether, it's to stay open enough to rebuild after it. Not out of duty, but because love remains possible. The scroll doesn't give you the ending you expect. It doesn't wrap up with marriage, or death, or even resolution. It ends, rather, with one final unanswered question. And what if we forget all of this? Below it, a single line. Then let our hands remember what our words could not. The scribe sets the scroll down, and you don't realize you've been holding your breath until it's over. There's something haunting about this last one, not because it was sad, but because it was true. Everyone forgets. Everyone changes. Everyone drifts. But love, the scroll reminds you, is not a static place. It's the trail you leave when you return, over and over, with gentleness, with curiosity, with the willingness to relearn. Outside, the air has changed. The breeze now smells of dust and jasmine. Morning is nearer than it was, but not quite yet. There's still time. Time to remember the shape of someone you love, even if you've forgotten why you first reached for them. Time to trust that the hands will know, even when the mind has wandered. And maybe that's what love becomes in its wisest form, not knowing everything, but being willing to ask again. There's a hush in the room now, different from earlier silences. Not empty, not expectant, just still. The kind of stillness that settles after something has been spoken that doesn't need repeating. The scribe feels it too, you think? His movements are careful, slower than before, like he's aware this final scroll isn't meant to impress, only to stay. It's smaller than the rest, its edges worn into soft curves, as if passed between many gentle hands. He lifts it, unrolls it, and reads. This scroll is unlike the others, not a guide, not a dialogue. It's something closer to reflection on a kind of love that lingers even when no one is in the room. The title, written in delicate gold at the top, reads, When You're Alone and Still Loved. It doesn't begin with a declaration, just a murmur. Some nights, there is only your breath and the moon. But that too can be an embrace. At first, you think this might be a scroll for the heartbroken, but soon it becomes clearer. This is not about loneliness. It's about solitude with memory, about love that stretches beyond presence, held in gestures, in routines, in the space someone once filled and still does, in their own quiet way. The scroll speaks of how intimacy endures through absence, not in dramatic fashion, but in small, steady signs. The cup left on the table, the extra slice of bread cut out of habit, the scarf still folded the way they used to fold it. There's no grief here, not really, just a kind of whispered remembering. One line reads, You do not see the moon every night. Still, it pulls the tides. It's a reminder that love, once lived, doesn't vanish with distance, it changes form. It becomes a current, invisible but steady. Historians still debate the origin of this text. Some believe it was written by women wives of traveling merchants, or widows in a garden town in Persia, who shared stories under grapevines while the summers dragged on. Others think it was penned by a poet nearing the end of their life, leaving behind a soft lesson for whoever would inherit the quiet. Whoever wrote it, one thing is certain, they understood the shape of a life spent remembering not out of sadness, but choice. There's a passage that strikes you deeply. It reads, Braid your hair as if he will arrive. Place scent at your neck as if she will kiss it. Not to invite them back, but to remind your body is still loved. It's not a plea for return. It's an offering. A way to treat yourself as someone worthy of care, because someone once saw you that way, and perhaps still does, even if only across time. The scroll continues with small acts of remembrance, rubbing oil into your hands, singing the song they used to hum while preparing fruit, sleeping on your side of the bed because it feels right, not because anyone told you to. Love is present in these things the scroll suggests, not always visible, but there. Woven into daily gestures, there's a note of gentle humor here too. One line describes a woman who talks to her cat in her husband's voice, not because she's confused, but because it makes her laugh. Another mentions a man who continues to pour 2 cups of tea every evening, placing one in front of an empty chair, not mournfully, but as routine. There's a short tale in the middle of the scroll, told with no names. A woman waits 10 years for her lover to return from war. He never does. But one day she begins making 2 bowls of breakfast again, not from hope, but from rhythm. It reads, her neighbors called it delusion. She called it devotion. There's something uncheckable in that image. Love here isn't about being seen. It's about continuity, the simple, soft persistence of ritual. You find yourself breathing slower. Your fingers rest on your lap still. Your eyes close, just for a moment, to better picture the scroll's final list. It's called Ways to Remember That You Were Loved. The way you tuck your feet in at night. How you hum when nervous, though you never used to. The creak in your laugh that someone once called a blessing. Your knowledge of which tea helps what ache. The habit of saving the ripest fruit without knowing who for. No commentary follows, no explanation. Just that gentle list, and then silence. The scribe lowers the scroll and places it flat, not rolled, on the table. You watch him rest his fingers on it for a moment, as if grounding himself. You understand. This scroll doesn't end with a lesson. It ends with a presence. One that doesn't leave, even when the words stop. You lie back, eyes open but soft, letting the weight of that final thought settle over you. You think of the people you've loved, the gestures they left behind, the words you still whisper when you're alone, the way you brush your fingers across your sleeve when you're anxious because someone once took your hand and did the same. Love doesn't always look like a person standing beside you. Sometimes it's in the sound of a familiar kettle, the memory of a touch that still informs how you hold yourself, the smell of cinnamon that always, inexplicably, makes you feel safe. These aren't memories exactly, they're living threads. And the scroll reminds you that you carry them not to ache, but to be whole. And as the last flicker of candlelight trembles on the wall, you understand love doesn't end, it changes. It quiets, but it does not disappear. Sometimes it lives in absence, echoing through time not to haunt, but to hold. And maybe that's what this whole night has been about. Not teaching, not warning. Just reminding you softly, sleepily, that love is not a moment. It's a rhythm, one you still carry. And now the night has softened completely. The scrolls are silent. The scribe has vanished, or maybe he was never there at all. The candle has melted into a quiet pool of wax, flickering low but warm. You're no longer leaning forward, chasing the next story. You're sinking back slowly, gently like a boat that's finally found the center of a still lake. Your breathing has slowed, perhaps without you noticing. The air around you feels heavier in a good way, like a blanket pulled up just beneath your chin. All the vivid images, the folded silks, the whispered questions, the fig sellers and oil burners, the old lovers and their tea still float somewhere nearby, but they don't ask for your attention now. They're settling too, like dust drifting to the bottom of a sunlit room. Nothing left to figure out, nothing urgent to remember. Just the knowledge that love, in all its strange forms, has always found a way to endure. Whether in the body, in ritual, or in the silence between two people who still choose to stay. Let that thought carry you deeper. Let the rhythm of it match the slow tide of your own heartbeat. There is nothing more to know right now, nothing more to do. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your thoughts blur softly like ink on wet paper. Let your body remember how it feels to rest. You're safe here. You're home here. And if your mind wanders, just follow it gently like a breeze slipping through a curtain. No need to return. Just sleep, just drift, just be.